Inflation is one of the most damaging things politically. Who's ever in power tends to be voted out, very quickly if inflation is high. The example that I'm going to give, last time this happened in the United States was during the Carter administration, and then that's what led to the so-called Reagan Revolution, Ronald Reagan getting elected, right? But Ronald Reagan still had to kind of endure something very similar, and I think Volcker was the head of the Fed at the time, and he actually took a lot of punishment politically. What is the difference here, Greg? And again, like, fine, let's say we endure inflation, but isn't that just going to exacerbate the problem, right? Because at the end of the day, who benefits from inflation? It's anyone who holds assets. It's the government, of course, right? But anyone in the middle and lower classes that save and earn in fiat, they get absolutely crushed. So isn't that just going to exacerbate the problem that you find in the United States today, which is the huge gaps in wealth inequality? What is your response to that? Do you think that Powell has the, excuse my language, cojones to follow Volcker, what he did?
Yes, great question, Nico. This is a question from somebody who's, you said you hadn't studied it in school, and perhaps that's a great thing, because people who do study it tend to be brainwashed by the Keynesian, well, let's call it Keynesian brainwashing. Okay, so they get brainwashed by the Keynesian policies. Here's what I don't know the outcome in either scenario. It's just my belief that the outcome in an inflation scenario is more drawn out and less disturbing than the outcome in a global depression scenario, which could be followed by global war. Okay? I don't believe the first one leads to global war. I do believe the second one, global depression, could lead to global war. And there are the risks that I tend to evaluate between the two. And why cannot Jerome Powell be Chairman Paul Volcker of the 1980s? And incidentally, that's when I started my career trading, was in the 1980s with Paul Volcker. Very simply, and I see this note here from Bunny, very simply because the US debt situation today is about 4 times worse than it was when Paul Volcker was chairman of the Fed, which is to say, when Volcker was chairman of the Fed trying to fight the inflation boogeyman, total debt to GDP was 30%. Now, today, Jerome Powell is trying to fight the same battle when debt to GDP is 4 times as high, which is to say it's at 120%. It's a diametrically different challenge for Powell versus Volcker. In fact, I'll invoke my grade 11 math example here. It's impossible for Powell to do it given the debt spiral situation that the USA is in. He can pretend he wants to be like Volcker, and I'll just pull out my math and say, hey, stupid, listen to me. You cannot fight the same battle because you've accumulated a debt burden that is vastly different from your predecessor. So give your head a shake, you fucking moron, okay? And listen, you cannot do it with the same tools. You will only cause global depression. It's called a debt spiral. Wake the fuck up, you stupid lawyer. Sorry.
No, I think you said it perfectly. I think we're all very frustrated by the actions of our so-called betters, our leaders. They're acting like clowns, like that's for sure. So you said something very interesting, Greg. I'm going to ask you, right? You said global depression could potentially lead to global war. Why does it end in global war? And wouldn't you say this time is different due to the advent of nuclear weapons, right? When, the whole theory of mutually assured destruction. So does it have to lead to global war? And why does a global war happen in the first place?
Okay, so I'll answer your second question first. Does a global war happen? Because the only way you can conquer your own poverty is to take over another nation and plunder them to the benefit of your own citizens. Okay. And the second part of your question is the nuclearization. Well, you started with weapons that moved from a machine gun to the Gatling gun to some other extremely powerful guns. This is just another augmentation of the arsenal. I don't believe it means they don't do it, even if it means mutually assured destruction. I don't want to get in there. I am not a military strategist, and I don't even want to think that the possibility of that, Nico, purely because it's just such an god-awful outcome. I would hope that the chairman of the Federal Reserve sits back and said, I'm going to change my inflation target from 2% annualized. Just throwing a number out there for you people. How about if we live with 4% annualized versus nuclear destruction? Tell me which one you'd rather have. It's that simple.
Yeah. Do you think this was avoidable? Do you think that they, from my perspective as a Bitcoiner, they printed an ungodly amount of money due to the thing that we can't be said on YouTube, the pandemic, I'll say that. And another component, right, is this: they bought into the modern monetary Kool-Aid, which I think is an absurd idea.
Yeah.
So do you think that this whole crisis that we find ourselves in today could have been avoided if governments just did nothing as a reaction to the pandemic?
I will say that the MMT people are god-awful mathematicians, and Stephanie Kelton should be fired. First of all, she should be fired for incompetence. Then I could take it to a next step and say, there's a level of absolute there's a level of concern that I could not live with myself if I had given that advice to a nation. And if she's able to live with herself with the advice she gave to a nation flippantly, and so be it. She's a selfish individual. I don't have the same DNA makeup as she does. And she did it so she could get a title of a book. The book was based on false facts. It was based on elementary thinking. It was absolutely disgraceful from an economics analysis perspective. She's destroying the life of our children. And I just have to call her out on that. And all you MMTers out there that believe she had the hopium, well, fuck you, stupid fucks, okay? She was wrong. She was wrong from day one. If you want to listen to an ill-advised armchair academic who has never sat in a true risk chair so that she can advise where the world should go, well, I guess we get what we deserve listening to that drivel. It was an absolute academic exercise with zero experience sitting in a risk chair. That's all I can say. It's the difference between something that should work on a formula on a blackboard versus the reality of living in a risk chair where the dynamics of pricing a market change instantaneously, not over the life of, and chapter 4, we're going to deal with this. Too many armchair academics in positions of power right now. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's unfortunate, and you see this a lot in academia. And, I feel like I personally missed that whole garbage because I just skipped it altogether. And I find myself a lot thinking, I'm like, just pure common sense from, just learning things on the ground, I think puts me in a Naval, I think, has one of the best quotes, right? It's like, if you get into higher education, you lose your mind or something like that, like you get the academia, but you lose the common sense or something. Is that a price that people should be willing to pay anyways?
How about Nico? I think there's, but can I just say this in defense of a lot of really good professors?
Sure.
There are a lot of real out there. A shout out to my alma mater, and David Collum at Cornell University. Okay. He is the example of a professor that tries to examine a situation and adjust his thesis as the information changes versus some knucklehead like Kelton, again, that wrote a book and then is going to stick to that thesis, sort of like Shifty Pete sticks to his thesis and Paul Krugman sticks to his thesis that, you know, the impact of the internet is going to be somewhere around the level of a fax machine. What an absolute embarrassment. Like Paul Krugman, seriously, for the benefit of the future children of this world, just go away and hide in some little closet, you fucking failed academic, okay? You are an embarrassment to risk management globally. And just because you can write in the New York Times, which I wouldn't wrap fish in the New York Times as a publication because they're so conflicted, but go and write your little shit in the New York Times because you see a world that you've never actually managed. You only do it on a blackboard in front of a bunch of students. If I was from Princeton University, I had a degree from Princeton University, and Krugman was still an endowed professor at Princeton, I would rip that piece of shit up because it's an embarrassment, his analysis.